I issue purchase orders. There's an entire process that I think a lot of people don't really understand. We're not just funneling the lights for one school. We have 65. We don't just collect bids and say, hey, you're in or you're not. There's so many other facets that we have to think about. We're not just not awarding you because you can't handle the work, but there might be something that we are thinking about that you might not be. And we don't want to see anyone we award a contract to fail.
Hello, all my amazing GovCon winners. I have before you, in my opinion, Sherelle Evans is the queen of procurement. She is the person who at some point in time you may have sent a proposal to, or someone similar to her is listed as a point of contact. So she has this insight that I don't have, probably you don't have that's viewing this, and she is here to share behind the scenes all things about procurement and acquisition. So Sherelle, welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kizzy. I'm so excited to be here and be a resource to your viewers and the platform. You're doing amazing work. All the insight that you give, I'm sure people are taking notes and taking it back, and I'm just along for your journey.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, talk to us, because I know you've worked in procurement in New Jersey for schools. You've worked in procurement for major brands that many of us would easily recognize. So talk to us as far as, how did you get in this? What does that even mean? Is it, hey, go buy this? Like, how does that even look like? How does that appear?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it kind of started with understanding that I was able to add value very early on, and not even a career, just in general, with my mom and my parents and buying their first home, and kind of taking those instances to say, hey, did you think about this? How am I able to add some value? Looking at a home and saying, hey, maybe let's knock out this wall or add a door in the back, and still be able to keep the price low, and or have someone else do that service for you as you're purchasing or procuring whatever you're looking at. And so that was kind of like how I started being more strategic, because there is a strategic component to what we do as procurement managers, and another word is strategic sourcing managers. And so if you're talking about my actual roles and responsibilities and an actual job, as an intern, I worked at commercial finance strategic initiatives at GE in Stamford, Connecticut. This is definitely 15 plus years ago. I'm dating myself. And there, I kind of recognized that there was a part of strategy that had to do with efficiencies. There's part of a strategy that has to do with stakeholders. Those are the people who owns their budgets. So when they come to you and ask you for things, they know what they are willing to spend, and sometimes they don't. And so you kind of walk through all of those things. And then strategic initiatives is just really saying, how do I get from point A to point Z more efficiently? We're thinking about timelines. We're thinking about budgets. We're thinking about suppliers. We're thinking about all these different things that kind of fall into the sourcing bucket. Again, to your point, I have been working in the public entity with Newark Public Schools, and also working in the private entities with brands such as Toys R Us back in the day, doing some marketing and some, we call it point of sales. When you walk into a store and you see the new movie is Barbie, all of the Barbie PODs that comes up and you see this big display, that's a procurement manager working with a print company to print that and to send it out to all of the stores. And we would do bids on that. So that was one component of my job. And then, going down to Coach and Tory Burch, even a steel manufacturer, right? Steel and powder paint and macrolons, all these different substrates and metals. And then also working in a pharmaceutical capacity as well. One thing that a strategic manager, a strategic sourcing manager, a procurement manager can do is all things. Anything that you can think of. And Kizzy, as you're sitting and you have a chair that you're sitting on. So someone purchased that fabric, someone purchased the metal to that chair, right? But before anything, those are raw materials and we want a finished good. And so I used to purchase what we call furniture and equipment for our offices. So we would put bids out, and that chair could easily go for $1,100 for, if you look online and you just look at Amazon. However, if you go go right to the manufacturer, it's going to be a different price. And so you think about a product, the more you buy, the less the unit price will be. Those are the strategies that we think about as those managers for this portfolio. And for that category, that would be corporate services, right? Because we're moving into a new building and we want great furniture, but what does that look like for our budget? And so just walking through all those different things, I have plenty of examples of different things, like procuring a chinchilla for a throw that someone wants it for a photo shoot, right? And you're sitting here like, I have no clue anything about chinchillas. And at the same time, you're like, well, this is the point where you find out. This is the part where you do the research. Is there like chinchilla brokers? Because clearly I can't go outside and catch one, right? And what could be the differences? You know, it could be a North American chinchilla versus a South American chinchilla, or a female versus a male. And they wanted it in a different color. So what does that mean? Do we have to dye the fur? Does it come, you know, in a standard color before anything? And so I learned a lot about that one commodity that they wanted, and they wanted it in a certain time, right? How many chinchillas do I actually need to make one throw, which is like a 20 by 18? Now you're talking about how many chinchillas and the production of it as well. And so you think about all the different facets of being a manager of procurement in a certain commodity. I think your students and your viewers not necessarily thinking about what we do on a day-to-day. We don't just collect bids and say, hey, you're in or you're not. And then we hand you a contract. There's so many other facets that we have to think about on a day-to-day. And it's really been the core of what I like to do. I like being of service of people. I like giving information. I like being able to make a decision, an informed decision. And that's what procurement managers do. Every organization should have one. Small businesses typically do not. You know, they typically have a person that's like, okay, I need to go out and purchase something, versus being a procurement manager. Purchasing is something totally different. You go out to the store and you say you need ketchup. You like the brand that you like. A procurement manager is going to look at that ketchup a little differently, right? We're going to look at the size of the bottle. If it's 20 ounces, if it's 40 ounces, and we're going to look at the unit price. If it's a cheaper unit price versus that retail price, we're going to buy the one that has a cheaper unit price. And it might be the difference of 20 cents, right? But if it's 20 ounces versus 40, that might mean a lot for us. We're paying a totally different price because you pay for the bottle, you pay for the cap, you pay for the label, you pay for what we call the substance that goes inside, right? We call that bulk. You pay for all of that. And so that unit price, let's say is $3.30, but they're charging you $4.99. That's where you start to really understand what procurement is. It's all those things to make that finished good and how we are distributing it. And so I hope that gives you a better understanding of purchasing versus procuring. These are totally different things. I've purchased a lot of things. Stakeholders have come to me and said, hey, I want that chair. And I'm like, okay. I go right onto that site and I say, he wants that chair. I order it and it's delivered. Versus, you know, a department head says, I need 800 of these chairs. It's very vague. It's a spec that we have to look for. And it could come from 3 different vendors, right? He didn't give me a price. He didn't say where he wanted it. He didn't say the timeline. He didn't say what his total budget would be, because a unit price on a chair is totally different outside of the shipping costs, outside of the timeline, right? And there's a difference between public and private. Private, which is money for, you know, obviously they're going to make money. They might say, hey, I want this from China. I don't care where you get it from, actually. Just get it to me. Public is totally different. You have parameters that you have to stay inside of. There's certain things that a procurement manager has to know. And it's not that easy to go get those chairs from China if they specifically say they don't want it from China.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into being a procurement, what we call change agent, because there are some changes and things that go into procurement versus just purchasing something someone needs or service.
And what's so great about this, and I want to highlight, is especially for those of you who are watching and you're interested in selling products, or you sell products and you may wonder, why aren't they getting back to me with pricing? Why am I having difficulty sending them an email? Because the pricing of the thing is less the more that you buy. So if you're only looking for a one and done, whether it's for a school, it's for a private client, it's for the federal government, and you're just looking for a handful, the priority is for those who's buying hundreds of thousands or millions or million ounces of the thing. Because the federal government buys ketchup, they buy chairs, they buy basically all of these things. Maybe not a chinchilla, but they're buying. Hey, you never know, because they procure horse training, they've purchased animals sometimes. I mean, you never know. But this is one of the reasons why some manufacturers or distributors, for us entrepreneurs, they don't reach out to us because they're focused over here. But at the same time, based on what you've said, I haven't heard you say anything like, oh, I didn't work with small businesses, I don't want to work with small businesses. So talk to us about that. Like, in all of your roles, especially with the school district, how did you go about working with small businesses? And those that you did work with, what is it that they did where you're like, oh my gosh, I wish more small businesses did this?
Absolutely. That's a great question. As a procurement manager, we specifically have goals towards reaching out to small businesses and funneling the work and the budget money to those businesses to fuel the economy. That is something that we have to do. We've been doing it prior to, DE&I has come out. We've been doing this for years. So if we get a budget for example, light bulbs, all of the schools need light bulbs, right? That is something people probably don't think about as often, but it's a large commodity for the schools. And so we would have one bid for the larger companies, which are probably more the national companies. And the reason why we have one separately for them is because they will have a larger inventory. We're not just funneling the lights for one school. We have 65, right? And so you have to think about those. And some of those lights are not the LED lights. They're not the up-to-date lights, or they could be. There's a variety. It's literally pages and pages and pages. And there's certain quantities that we will need, and to ensure that that particular supplier has it on hand, that we don't have to wait 12 weeks to get it, right? And so those larger companies, they are the manufacturer, or they have a connection to a larger provider somewhere else. Now, the smaller companies, we would have a separate bid that's specifically for, it could be a dollar amount versus the number of bulbs that we're looking for. We can give them a subset. If there's 1,500 bulbs, and I have seen a bid like this, I do recall, 1,500 different types of bulbs, we will take that same subset and we will bring it down to 500 different types of bulbs, or let's say 200, and we will give it to the set aside bid, which is specifically for small businesses. Those are the minority, the women-owned, the veterans, all of the above. We call them meeby-weebies. But we have to source and look for those meeby-weebies. And they have to be, in this case, within that city limit. So we stay in New Jersey for the small set-aside businesses because we want to help that economy. That is the economy that we're looking for. And so we'll specifically look for that, and we will list how many we solicit to, how many we reached out to, and that want to be included in that bid. So if we're going for $20,000, they know it won't be anything more than that, and the quantities that are there will be much, much lower. If 1,500 different types of bulbs, and then we want specifically for a set aside, it might be 500 bulbs, but they might be 5 quantity for each. So that's not really hurting their margins, because more than likely they will have 5 on hand, right? At any given point. If it's delivery next week versus 2 months from now, we know that it could probably take a little bit of time for them to get it. However, we still have a larger bid that we can look to, that we know that item for that bulb with this particular supplier, we ask for 500. We know they will have it on hand. So it is okay for us to not receive it from the smaller company, because we know they might have some supply chain issues, a late shipment, all those things we think of. However, we still want to give them the opportunity to be able to ship it to us. Sometimes it might come partially, right? We might ask for 5 and only have 3. Those are the things that we really understand about those small businesses versus the larger businesses. If we order 500, we don't necessarily expect them to only ship 2. We expect them to ship a larger quantity, right? So those are the things that we really funnel with each and every bid that we can. Even if we don't do a small set-aside bid for smaller companies, we will still include them in the larger pack, because oftentimes we then award award to several different companies for that one bid. So what you will see is if it's contract electrical light bulbs, it's contract 8965, it will have maybe a letter or a pound or something at the end. And that will indicate that this has been awarded to several different vendors. So it could be 8965 A, B, C, D, and E. So we've solicited to way more, but we have only issued contracts for 5 of them. And you will know when your term ends, when it doesn't, when we have some questions about if you can actually filter or if your business is bought by someone else. All those things we'll take in consideration when we're issuing those bids. So the smaller companies, we definitely solicit to all the time. Now with the private entity, it's a little different. We don't necessarily look for that, but for public entity, it is a must.
That's really good to know. And a couple of things for everyone's awareness. The MEBs, WEBs, minority business enterprise, and women-owned business enterprise is basically the acronyms.
Correct.
And for this multiple award, for someone who's definitely new, explain the main purpose of having, let's say, 5 vendors who can provide light bulbs, or 5 vendors who can provide scaffolding, or 5 vendors who can provide HVAC services.
Absolutely. So what we find is a lot of the times when we do bids, we ask some qualifying questions, and those qualifying questions could help us lead to more than one contractor or service provider or providing products. And what that will do is that'll tell us certain things like how many people do you have as employees, or how many bids or contracts do you currently already have. And so if you tell us you have $13 million in contract with a completely different entity, public entity, and our contract is for $10 million, we will understand that there's some risk that's involved. Because if you have $13 million with another, and your company has maybe 25 employees, we have to consider that we won't be priority at that case, right? And then we will have to then delegate some of that work to another provider at that point. That does not mean that we won't give you your money when we ask for the services. However, a lot of the times those bids will say $10 million for our entity, not to exceed. So we're not overloading you, or we're not also saying it could be the full $10 million. It might be $6 million, because the total contract for all 5 vendors would be $13 million. However, that's divvied up is the stakeholder, aka the person who owns the budget, how that is split out between those 5 different contractors. So we do take all those things into consideration, and using the same example in terms of the electric bulbs, if they deliver 3 and we ask for 5, we more than likely, if it doesn't come in the next 90 days, the 2 we probably won't order. We'll tack it onto another one of the vendors that we know has the inventory to deliver and when we need it.
I love that because it's having a backup. It's like just really simplifying it. It's like if Amazon doesn't have it, I can go to Walmart, I can go to Target. If I'm fortunate enough to live in an area that has all 3, or a Dollar Tree, and because at the end of the day, whether it's public money, it's private money, somebody's wanting this thing. And what I've gathered from you as far as like what you look for in small businesses and how you interact with them, there's a lot of patience. You're giving them grace. You're not trying to overload them. You understand, hey, a big company, if we need 10,000 light bulbs, they should be able to get it. But if a small business can provide 300, and that's still revenue, it's not as if 300 light bulbs or whatever one is selling, it's pennies. That's still a client, it's still getting paid. So I love that, because I found on the federal side, they're often very similar. They're very, very helpful, and they want us to be successful. And even with big businesses, we've done business with, for instance, with Walmart Grocery. We did some training with them. We've done training for a really well-known music label. So I love that, because I never want anyone to be afraid of procurement or somebody like you, because it's really clear you care and you're trying to get the job done, but with heart.
You are absolutely right. We take all things into consideration. It is literally a conversation. It's an intake about the needs of the business. And we don't want to see anyone we award a contract to fail. fail. That is not what we want to see. So in that contract, we will have those clauses that protect us and as well as the provider to say, hey, you're protected too, right? In certain instances where you cannot perform, we will walk through and we might give you 7 days to what we call cure, right? We want to make sure that you can do the work or handle the work, but we try to front load that risk mitigation to really understand where your company is by asking you those qualifying questions. We don't just pull them out of anywhere. We've been doing this a long time. The procurement manager does the research. We bring all the information to the stakeholders so they are informed. And that's why I said, you want to add value. That's what the procurement manager is for. We're not just not awarding you because you can't handle the work, but there might be something that we are thinking about that you might not be. And a lot of times it is risk mitigation.
Definitely, it's important. I always tell everyone, you can't fail. You got to always perform the contract by all means necessary. And I know there's a topic I'm asked all the time, and you probably were asked often. How does someone get paid? So whether it's on the public side, private side, so they deliver, whether it's the chinchilla, it's the light bulbs, it's some construction, it could be professional services like staffing. How are businesses paid?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so initially, there's some activities that happen for the procurement managers. If this is a new service, we really have to do some research in terms of what we're looking for, what our requirements will be. And so we then search out who falls in that pool, who can then perform those services or give us those products. And in those instances, we find out who has the capabilities and so forth. In other instances, we have contracts that are expiring and that we will need a new contract or we will be rebidding. And so that is a part of the procure to pay. There's certain stages. We go through needs, we go through sourcing, we go through purchasing, and then we go through payment. You're asking specifically about the payment portion. And so the payment portion comes in when, great question. The payment portion comes in after a contract is executed. Executed means finalized and signed by both parties. So all contracts have to be executed. You cannot perform any services or deliver any products without an executed contract. If you do not have an executed contract in hand, you are up for failure. Meaning, if someone asks you to do work and you don't have that and you submit an invoice stating that you did the work or provided the product, you are liable to not get paid. So that is one of the lists. Kizzy, I have the list of the do's and the don'ts. This is the expanded version of the don't. Don't submit an invoice if you do not have an executed contract. That is a no. And I tell my suppliers that all the time. Hey, where's your invoice? Actually, I don't see a executed contract in the system. Have you signed? And so all those things come up. So the only way that you can get paid is if you have an executed contract. This is public, right? Private is a little lax. I will say there's a few corporations where they can send you a purchase order, and a purchase order is considered a contract. And in that case, in that purchase order, there are terms and conditions that are stated on the back. Sometimes it's printed on the back of that purchase order, or it's at the bottom. And you can read through that and you are agreeing to those terms. And those are the things that you have to work toward. That purchase order is considered a contract. And you will then submit an invoice to that PO. So your first step with public and private, you will be issued a purchase order. That means that you can start work, because that order says, I would like these services, or I would like this product at this quantity with that stated date of delivery. You will work with again, we call them stakeholders, but you'll work with the business owner about those requirements that were needed. We stated them in the bid or the proposal, and they will work with you through all of that. And so finally, you perform the services or provide the product, and then you submit an invoice that will match that purchase order. That invoice should have that purchase order number on the invoice. That is also very, very key for us because we see purchase orders all day long. I issue purchase orders. There's an entire process that I think a lot of people don't really understand that we have to do in the background, and it's more of an e-procurement system. But we do somewhat what we call a two-way matching or three-way matching. There has to be a two-way matching of a purchase order. That's one. And then the second piece is an invoice. Or the three-way matching could be be an additional document, such as like a requisition that came before the purchase order. And internally, we're just saying that the monies are actually on the budget line for you to spend, for the stakeholders, the business owners to spend. There's other three-way matchings that actually the accounts payable department will help walk through. If your terms are net 30, that's when the payments will be made, unless your contract states something different. Now, if you're providing a service, sometimes, for example, with Dr. Kizzy's company, if you're having full-time employees come in and you need to hire them ahead of time, you will work with the stakeholders, the business owners, to say, hey, I need to hire 2 people to perform this bid proposal. That means I need 25% of this contract value up front. You do not have to submit an invoice for that because that was talked about and it's already completed in that contract. And so sometimes there are payments that are due up front. For example, it could be what I mentioned, the Barbie POS, and we're actually asking for materials and so forth. They might need monies up front. But again, that goes back to that risk management. So we know if this company is big enough, can they do it on their own? Do they need 50%? And we're negotiating. Maybe we bring it down to 25, right? We don't want you to feel like we're not a partner in this. At the same time, if your company is large enough, we're going to expect that you have some money up front, that you have some skin in the game as well, versus just saying, hey, we want 100% up front. We will never agree to 100% up front. Never, never, never.
Yeah, it's very rare because this is something that some will put out there. Oh, you can get paid in advance. You get all your money. And I've found that to be very, very rare. What I have seen is, for instance, we're bidding on an effort where there's all of these deliverables. And so each deliverable has a dollar amount. So in essence, that's very similar to having ongoing payments. It's just they're attached to a PDF, things of that nature. There may be other efforts where you ask them to take the sum and to divide it by 3 payments, 4 payments, take it and divide it by monthly payments. Or maybe you can negotiate, hey, for this, can I have a percentage up front? Especially even on the federal side, if the opportunity allows for it. And the way that you get this to really happen is for those of you that are having these direct conversations, whether it's over the phone, it's through Zoom, where you're having what's called like a capability brief and they're getting to know, like, and trust you. You have a lot more wiggle room with your payment than if you're just strictly responding to a bid, because the bid may say, we're just looking for this. But then again, I'll just add this every now and again. On the federal side, it'll say something like, we encourage multiple bids from the same company. So then you could mix it up. Maybe one bid, hey, this is what we want. The next bid, well, if you give us 25% upfront, we'll give you a discount of 4%. So just keep that in mind, but you're not going to get your money up front though.
No, nobody's
not really happening.
You have not performed any services or provided any products. We do know there are instances where we do have to give some money up front, but it will never be, in my instance, I've never seen more than 50% upfront. Normally it has a lot to do with production or full-time employees needing to be on that contract to actually execute something like that. Yeah. But once invoices come in on that purchase order, that's when payments, if you're net 30 or you're net 45, whatever your contract says, that's when you will see payment. So that is my note to everyone. You cannot receive payment without submitting an invoice. Now, if the invoice is incorrect or there's some discrepancies, the business owners are going to look at that. They're going to say, hey, you have 13 hours with this full-time employee, but I didn't see the work worth 13 hours. I saw the work worth 10, right? And so then you start to question. So having those check-ins with those business owners, having the check-ins with the procurement manager cannot pay you. We don't have anything to do with payments. We have done all of our due diligence. You are now a supplier in the system if you have not already been, and we check on supplier performance. So if there's an issue with payment and our business owners are saying, hey, they didn't do the full 13 hours, they'll come to me and say, Sherelle, I tried to work with the supplier. We've had some issues and here we are. That's when I'll come in and try to cure to say, hey, is this something that we can work through? Can you provide some additional documentation to say you actually did 13 hours? And those are some of the examples.
The thing is, especially on the Department of Defense side, they will issue what's called a cure notice. Yep. It's not anything you ever want. I've read a couple of them from a small business. I came new.
Okay.
And it's a very intense letter issued by their contracting office that outlines, just as you've stated, everything that's wrong. And then they're asking, what are you going to do to rectify this? Because again, nobody wants any of us to fail. They really don't. And so it's on us to make sure we're managing, making sure we're handling the paperwork. I mean, you've provided this awesome detailed explanation. So this is why it pays off to even have the simplest accounting system. So then everything matches, because you're there to get the products and services, to get them at the best value, and not to walk somebody through how to submit an invoice or how to properly get paid. Like, those are things that we as business owners, it's something that we just have to just get a little better on. I know we all start somewhere, but I love that you shared that. And how do people get in contact with you?
As a procurement manager?
In general, if you're open to it, people are going to want to reach out to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I can be reached on LinkedIn. First name Sherelle, Shirelle. Last name Evans, Evans. I also can be reached out via email, sherelle.evans@gmail.com. I am also on some other platforms, but they're more personal, more than anything, but professional ones are definitely LinkedIn, and I always am available on email. I also can have some bookings, personal bookings for one-on-one through Candidly also, and that would be Smart Bid Consulting. Again, you can reach me directly through email and we can set that time up. But I really appreciate that, because I was a little thrown back thinking, it's procurement manager, so you reach out to the procurement department.
No, I was like, let me throw a little spin, because, and this is one of the main reasons I have Sherelle here, is that she's in both. Like, another example of, you want someone who's doing it, not somebody who took some courses at the SBA and now they're trying to tell you all this stuff. I never worked in procurement. I interned at Lockheed Martin for 3 months when I was working on a master's degree. I mean, that's nothing, So she's in procurement. She's like actively in procurement, and she has a business to help those of you out there, which is amazing, because it's super important to have as much information and guidance as possible and to put it into action. That's what it's about, because as you ebb and flow as an entrepreneur, my goal is to have all of that here for you on the channel, and to have amazing people like Sherelle to help you along the way, because she knows what it takes to be able to work with other specialists like her. And we want you to be successful, because I know you're going to be successful, because if you weren't successful, you wouldn't be watching this, especially wouldn't be watching to this part.
I really, really appreciate, Kizzy, all that you're doing. And I really want to encourage everyone to reach out. We are resources. Everyone that she has on her channel are resources, and ask the questions. Sometimes they might not be the right questions, but sometimes you don't even know what you're looking for. So if you talk through it, we could provide some of that detail. And again, that's kind of how I started at a very, very young age. So always have to take baby steps before you start walking.
No, I love that. I love that. And I appreciate each and every one of you. Check out profitablecontracts.co for a really cool free download. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification. And until next time, everything is possible.